Hello and welcome. I'm Ashley with FMS, and thank you for joining us. Today in the studio, we have a fun conversation between FMS co-founder Dr. Lee Burton and FMS instructor Eric DeGotti. Coach Eric is the owner of One Human Performance and has had a long, successful career in both sports and fitness. During today's talk, our team of experts will be on hand collecting your questions and comments for Eric and Lee, so please feel free to submit those. Stay tuned until the end for that live Q&A session and an exclusive promotion code. All right, guys, if you're ready, we're ready. Let's get started.
Hey, thanks, Ashley. Really appreciate it. And thank you guys for joining us today. I'm really excited about this session today that we're doing with Eric, because we're going to get practical. We're going to talk about some stuff that I think we all deal with as professionals and even individuals that are out there working and training. And that's, how do I get the results I want? How do I achieve the goals that I'm searching for? And there's a lot to it. It's not just about, going on the internet and finding a program and just, let me do that program and hope that that program will give me the results I want. I think today we're going to dive in and just talk about different ways in which we can, decipher some of the things that we're seeing, but also how can we really create a good workout, a good training program to give us those results we're all searching for. And Eric's been doing it a long time. He's been working with FMS for quite a while. He's one of our top instructors, and he's got a unique background because not only does he train quite a few people, he trains a lot of different people, from kids all the way up to pro athletes. So I thought it would be great to have him on and give you his insight into how he creates training programs to get the results we all want. So let's bring Eric on. And the first thing we're going to do, Eric, is give everybody your background and kind of give everybody some insight into, how diverse some of the people you work with really are.
Well, first I want to thank you for the opportunity. I've been jonesing a little bit, missing being out on the road and teaching workshops. And so this is a great chance for us to share information and get feedback and interact with our community. My journey with doing this professionally started a little over 20 years ago, not to date myself, but it started off with more of a fitness type focus, just being a personal trainer. And then it grew from there, where it moved much more to performance. And over the years, I've gotten to work with athletes from just about every sport, from pro soccer to Olympic track to Major League Baseball, the NHL, and the NFL as well. As you can see, I've worked with the Giants for 9 years, from 07 to 2016. And the journey with FMS has been a big part of that. Starting teaching back, I think we're going on 14 years now.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when people ask and say how we got connected. And Eric, you came to one of the first seminars Gray and I did to a larger group, and I think you didn't. You took the information and ran with it and saw how can you weave it in, because you're one of those guys, in my opinion, to just collect a lot of education. You got the alphabet soup behind your name, all the credentials, but you really sifted through all that information and figured out how to make it work for you.
Yeah, I was always intrigued most of all the training stuff with the evaluation piece. And as I was going through school for exercise science, I had my brother who's also going to PT school, and so we would share notes. And while I was reading Zach Ziorsky and all the strength and conditioning stuff, he was reading Florence Kendall, and he was reading Shirley Sarman, and we would compare notes. And so the evaluation stuff really fascinated me, because I thought the more I could know about you, the better program I could write. And the good news was I put together really in-depth testing. The bad news was it was taking forever to do. So the FMS really fit at a key time for me, because it allowed me to filter out a lot of that information to figure out, well, what's really most important that I need to know about this person today that's going to really actually impact their program and their training.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what a lot of people struggle with, and kind of you just described it a little bit right there, is you have all this, and the assumption is you've got to take all this information in and do all this type of testing and evaluation. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, the person that you're evaluating, they just want to work out. They just want to program. They want to know, what do I need to do to reach my goal? And I think, part of what we try to do is try to figure out what's the least amount of information we can collect to get you on that path.
Yeah, and it's not about trying to figure out, well, what is it that I need to do with this person? It's just as important, if not more important, what should I not be doing with this person? Do they have pain with their movement? Are there movements that are significantly impaired? I don't need them to be perfect in their movement, and we could argue all day over beer and peanuts what perfect movement is, and that's not what we're about. It's, do you move well enough that I can actually give you the training program for the goal that you came in for?
Yeah, and I think you again said something right there. And I think one thing that I want to ask you and kind of create a little discussion about, if you follow FMS at all, and some of you may not, we got to change that, right? We always say you got to create a system and not a program. And I think that's creates some confusion because we're all searching for a program. Like I said to start, if you're going on the internet, you're always looking, hey, I want to know what's the workout of the day, or what's the program I need to go into, what's the best baseball program or program for soccer. And I think we always come at a little different, say, we want to create a system. Give me a little bit of insight on your background and what you've done, Eric, the difference between a good training program and a system.
Yeah, I mean, especially now with everybody having to be working out remotely, and there's people selling programs online, and hey, buy my baseball program for $1 online. That's just a bunch of exercises thrown out there, and we're hoping that those exercises are going to transfer into better baseball performance, into nicer abs, or into no back pain. But we don't know, because the question I always ask the first time I meet with an athlete is to say, well, why are you not there now? What's holding you back? Is it your mobility? Is it your motor control? Is it your strength? Is it your power? Is it your diet? Is it your recovery? Or is it just you picked the wrong parents? There's a lot of different reasons why people aren't performing at the level that they want to. But unless we know why they're not there, I don't know where to even start. And just kind of throwing exercises at it is just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping for the best.
Yeah, because you got to start out, you got to set the baseline, you got to know, and I think again, know what not to do. Know the things. Again, you mentioned diet and recovery. Diet being a good one. If you're trying to improve your diet, well, the first thing you need to do is remove all the bad stuff that you're eating. Take away some of the fast food that you're consuming a couple of times a week. Take away certain things. And that's no different than training. If you've got, whether it's pain or whether it's, again, an exercise that's not going to help you reach that goal, or crunches going to help you be a better baseball player, maybe not. So those are exercises that we can remove, right?
Yeah, and then it's a priority list of there's nice to do and there's needs to do. There's a lot of cool exercises we can find on YouTube. Yeah, they'd be nice to do, but if I have a team that I'm working with and I have to have 40 players managed in a weight room, and I can't keep my eye on every single one of them, and we only have 45 minutes, nice to do doesn't make it in. I need to do the stuff that they need to do, that I know that this team has showed me through testing that is their weakest links, and what is going to be the biggest factors in not only keeping them durable and healthy and on the field, but getting them actually better at what they're there for. The first conversation I have with the team is realize that every rep, every set of every exercise that we do from this point forward has one goal in mind, is to get you on the field and win games. And that's it. It's not to get better at training. The goal of training is to get better at whatever your goal is.
Right. And I think one thing specifically with athletes, the one thing I personally see training doing is allowing you to practice better. You're only going to become a better baseball player if you go play baseball, if you go practice fielding, catching, throwing, hitting. Well, what training does, and again, kind of speak to this, Eric, in my opinion, what training does is it allows you to do those things more precise, more often, without breaking down, without, going out there and practicing for an hour. Maybe your back doesn't hurt as much. That's what training can do, is to set you up to have better practice.
Everything that's on that performance pyramid, the movement and the performance factors, they just put you in a better position to express that skill. So, a lot of you talk about baseball, and that's what I work quite a bit with, is I'll go and sit in on a hitting instructor or a pitching instructor's lesson, and they're trying to get them to get over their front leg in a finish as a pitcher, or they're trying to get them to fire their hips under their shoulders as a hitter. And sometimes I'll interrupt and say, they can't do that. And you can give them all the drills in the world, but their body doesn't understand what you're asking it to do. because they don't have hip rotation, or they don't have trunk rotation, or they don't have the ability to hinge at their hips to get out over their front leg. So unless we address that, these drills aren't going to do anything but frustrate both of you. And so unless you have a system to dissect that to see, is this a movement issue? Is it a performance issue? Or is it a skill issue? And once you've gotten sufficient movement, and we know that that's not a barrier, well, now it's a skill issue, and now the instructor can actually do what they're there to do, is get you better at the skill of hitting, throwing, whatever it may be.
Right, and that's a great point. Is again, starting the conversation off, we talked about we want to be more precise in what we prescribe. That's from a coaching perspective to our training and training perspective. Don't waste time doing things that don't necessarily matter. If your goal is to lose weight, whether your goal is to be a better performer, the whole purpose of taking time on the front end is to save time on the back end. I mean, you're only going to have a certain amount of time with a group of athletes that you're working with or an individual that you're working with. So the whole purpose of taking some extra time to screen, to test, to do these things and collect that information is to be more precise in what you prescribe.
The story I always tell that you're making me think about is I had a professional strength coach tell me, "Oh, Eric, you'd be so excited. We put a bunch of correctives in our warm-up program." And I smiled, politely, and realized he doesn't get it. Because let's say you put a bunch of correctives in there for people who don't need to get corrected, that have all twos or higher, and they don't need movement correction. The second group is, well, what if you gave them corrections for shoulder mobility, but they need active straight leg raise? Well, they're not getting anything out of that either. It's kind of like you went to the doctor and said, oh, you'd be excited. I gave a bunch of drugs to my last patient. Well, how do you know they need them in the first place? And how do you know which ones they need unless you know what your diagnosis is?
Well, and let's be honest, and again, try to get more practical for all of us is, the challenge sometimes, though, Eric, is if you do have a baseball team or you do have a soccer team, how do you integrate and deal with the 20 kids or the 20 athletes I've got coming in? We're sitting there saying, hey, you got to screen them, you got to give them all these different things. And I totally agree with you. A corrective warm-up is not a corrective warm-up, it's a warm-up, right? So how do we deal with those types of groups?
Well, each team situation is going to bring a different challenge, whether you're working with an athletic team or whether you're working with a group fitness type setting. If you have the ability to screen everybody, that's great. If not, we know that there's going to be some key issues where there's going to be mobility limitations in the ankle and the hip and the T-spine. We know that there's going to be some key areas where there's going to be motor control and stability issues. Okay, and so we want to make sure that we're checking those boxes as part of our program. Then from there, the next thing is, if you do have the ability to screen, but you can't give everybody individual programs, well, the next step is, at the very least, remove the negative. I had a baseball team that I screened in the preseason, and the coach was watching, and when he watched his kids do the overhead squat, I think we had 30 plus kids, and I think only 2 of them scored higher than a 1 in their deep squat. And when he watched that, and he said, wow. And he said, well, we squatted with weight all last off season. Now I know why all the kids got hurt and why we didn't really get anything out of it, because they couldn't even do it with a dowel over their head. It wasn't getting better with a bar on their back.
Yeah, I mean, one of the scenarios, when I was working with high school, I worked with a high school for about 10 years, and I would screen the basketball team all together. And I would literally line them on the baseline and look at all of them. And I think that, one thing that, whether it's group or whether it's a team environment, if you're doing group fitness, for example, or have a small group in there, it's also what you're looking for. And I think the big thing is figuring out what this group can and can't do if I'm going to train them. If I look at all those basketball players, I had 15 guys, sometimes 20 guys lining up at the end of the court, and I see that, 5 of those guys couldn't even stand on one foot or couldn't lunge or had poor push-up, then I would know maybe those things I should not be adding into their group workout or their team workout. Some of the guys, yeah, you guys can do it, but some of these other ones, they can't. I need to remove that. And I think that's a key component that people overlook when they talk about training programs for a group or a team.
But the other thing I want to clarify too is, when we remove it, it's not bad, and we don't remove it forever. So if you can't even touch your toes, well, deadlifting is not probably the best thing for you to do. It doesn't mean deadlifts are bad. Deadlifts are amazing, but you're going to have to earn your way back to the deadlift. And the first step is, you got to show me you can at least touch your toes. And then once you could do that, then I got to teach you to hip hinge. And then once you can hip hinge, then I can start introducing deadlifting. But I got to clear that up first. And when we look at that exercise and you say, well, people can get hurt deadlifting, they can get hurt for a number of different reasons. One, it's a lack of movement competency because they can't even touch their toes, as an example. Second is maybe they don't have the skill to actually deadlift. And I need to be a skilled coach in teaching them that technique and form. So you could be a 3 on your active straight leg raise and still get hurt in your deadlift. Or you may have a 3 in your leg raise and you have perfect form, but then it's a matter of a capacity issue. And maybe you had great form in your first 2, 3, 4 reps, and that 5th or 6th one did you in. Well, that was a capacity and a programming issue. So when we get hurt with movement, it's not as simple as saying, well, they got hurt because they had a low movement score, or someone says, oh, well, they had a high movement score and they still got hurt. That disregards the validity of the screen. No, because it could also be one of those other factors.
Well, one thing, a colleague, and you know him well, is John Tureen, who, when we first started working with John, who was the strength coach for the Indianapolis Colts years ago, this was probably 2001, 2002, when we started connecting, and we started talking about, integrating into this movement screen at the time. And one thing he told me that resonated with me at the time is he said, Lee, the one thing this is forcing me to do is to become a better strength coach. Now I'm looking at him, I'm like, he's at the pinnacle, he's at the peak of his profession, working with an elite professional team. And what it did is, he realized that, okay, if half these players can't do this exercise, it doesn't mean he doesn't still work on strength or power or endurance or whatever it is. It just means this exercise is not appropriate for this individual, which means then he has to go find another exercise that will still accomplish the same thing. So you said it just then. When we say remove, doesn't mean we're still not going to work on leg strength or upper body strength or mobility or stability, whatever it is. It just simply means, hey, this exercise is probably not the best. Let's go pick something else out. So it forces you to start thinking and being a little bit more creative about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and from there, okay, well, once you pass the movement screen, well, that just told me kind of what not to do, but it doesn't necessarily tell me what to do as an athlete, because I still don't know what physical attributes you possess and what you need to excel at your sport as just an athlete, not necessarily baseball players, soccer athlete, or football player. So that's where the FCS is the next step to say, well, I want to work on power. And they'll say, okay, well, we'll do power cleans. Well, is that even what you need? If you could broad jump across the room, you may have all the power you need, and the limiting factor is not so much power, but it may be your postural capacity and your work tolerance. It may be your motor control. And it's just being exhibited in what you think is power, but it's really not that. But unless you have a system, you're just kind of throwing an exercise based on its name and hoping that it produces that effect.
Yeah, the assumption is for a lot of these younger individuals, for example, that they've got to work on power, they've got to work on certain things because that's what their sport demands. Talking about baseball, and again, you work with a lot of baseball athletes, and again, I get this question, having a couple of beers at the cul-de-sac with my friends saying, hey, Lee, my kid's a pitcher, I got to get him a little bit more stronger, I got to create better rotation. And the assumption is we're just going to have him with rotating and doing certain things, when again, I need to figure out, does he need or she need rotation, or do they need something else? So I think the big assumption in baseball is you just got to work on rotation, and that may not be what you've got to focus on.
And rotation could be a lot of different things. You're talking about mobility and rotation and mobility. Can I rotate my T-spine, rotate my hips? Or are you talking about motor control, that I can actually control and decelerate and put the brakes on and actually have anti-rotation in my strength? Is it strength in rotation, meaning that, okay, I'm an offensive lineman and I want to not get turned and open up a gap? Or is it power and rotation? And then specific to what sport, what position, all those things. So being able, just sitting on your butt and doing a V-sit twist with a medicine ball doesn't cure all ills. You have to figure out what, and that's the elegance of having a system, is figuring out, okay, well, how do I know which one to plug in where in terms of my exercises is really the art of training.
Right, and I think you said one thing, especially with younger individuals and focusing on kids, who I know you train a lot. You got kids, you got some kids playing sports. is that anti-rotation aspect. And I think that's one thing that especially a lot of the individuals out there who are playing a sport or doing certain activities where they think about rotation, it's just as important, or I may argue more important, that they can control their rotation and stop. So more anti-rotation exercises may be just as much or more important, especially those younger athletes, those younger individuals who have a lot of mobility.
Yeah, and when you talk about there's something as simple as sprinting to first base or to the end zone, is the basics of physics is the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And if you have poor rotary stability, as an example, when you go to drive your arm forward and your opposite leg forward, if you can't connect across, you're going to end up swiveling right to left. And now energy that should be going this way and straight ahead is now getting diverted out here. And we know when you divert energy away from the direction that we want to go, it's going to slow you down. I mean, anybody who's been a beginner skier knows you turn your nose your skis in to slow down and put the brakes on. Well, that's not what I want to have if I'm trying to beat out a ground ball and get down to first base. I need to get everything moving forward, and that's anti-rotation.
Yeah, and it's the same is true for even throwing a ball. You know, if you're throwing a ball and you're really loose and you can really wind it up and you release it, well, that's great. You got the rubber band, you stretch out that rubber band, you release it, but you got to be able to stop it. And whether it's landing and continuing on, going through the deceleration, you've got to be able to control that rotation in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and the elegance of how our sequencing works in rotation. And when you learn whether it's what you learn in TPI or on base or any of the rotational things, you learn about the sequencing and that the pelvis initiates our movement, and then it goes to the trunk, and then it goes to the arm, and then finally out through the hand or the bat or whatever the end piece of that is. And at the same time, the brakes have to go on in that same sequence. If my pelvis doesn't slow down to create an anchor for the trunk to rotate off of, I just spill over and over rotate, and that's I'm going to fly open in my swing, or I'm going to over rotate on my throw, and it's going to be hard to be on the mark and get your bat on plane. It's going to be hard to be on the mark and stay towards your target as you're hitting or throwing if you can't put those brakes on sequentially.
And again, to throw another kind of monkey wrench in that, in the sequencing thing, and we kind of get back to the whole movement conversation. You take that same athlete, Eric, and they're throwing, and when they land on that front leg and they've got a lack of ankle mobility or lack of ankle stability, that's going to create a problem in that entire sequence. So you can just throw that entire sequence out the window, not because they got a rotation problem, they may have an ankle mobility problem.
Yeah, and then let's bring that back to what I was talking about before, as far as skill versus movement. So, a popular drill in baseball is a towel drill to get you out over your front leg and try to snap the towel down. Well, if you don't have the ankle mobility to get there or the hip mobility to get there, then the drill is going to be fruitless. And everything kind of up that chain is being blocked. And doing more of that drill is never going to change that movement. We need to change the movement by first clearing the mobility limitations, and then teach you what to do with that new range of motion, and being able to dorsiflex over a fixed closed chain, and then be able to get the hip mobility so it connects and that the glute and the ankle can communicate with each other, so you can start to decelerate over that front leg.
Well, you packed in a lot right there, Eric, and I think that's the frustration I think a lot of us see. I mean, you and I, we've been having these conversations for years, but a parent who walks in the door to see you, and he comes in to see you and says, "Hey, I want my son to be able, he's a thrower. I wanted to create some strength and power so he can throw better." And now you got him over here on the side doing freaking ankle mobility work. How do you have that conversation with a parent?
You hit kind of a nerve there, because I have
That's what I'm trying
story.
to do, man.
I hit that. There's a story that I tell of a kid that came to me, and he was your prototypical kid that had psycho dad, and he had him on multiple teams. He was pitching on multiple teams, so he's already overusing his arm. And it hit home for me because, like you said, I have two boys that grew up playing baseball. They're in high school and college now, but when they were in that 13, 14 year old age, getting onto the big field, I saw countless amount of their friends that I coached and trained that were starting to stop playing because they hurt their arms. And so the story with this kid comes in, and he was probably around that age, And we screened him, and the dad saying, "Oh, I want him to be explosive. I want him to be explosive velocity, and and all these things." And we screened him, and I think he scored a 9. And when he goes to do his push up, there's just nothing there. I mean, he couldn't even move off the floor. And so we started giving him some correctives for push up. And dad's, he's been watching YouTube and ESPN, and he wants to see, ladders and plyo boxes and chains and tires and all the cool stuff that he sees MLB guys doing. And he sees us doing push up corrections. He's like, "No, I don't want this. More explosive, more explosive." And I said, "Look, we'll get there, but he needs to clear this hurdle first." And after butting heads for a session or two, we realized, what, we're probably not the right place for you. And he went on and he found a facility that gave him what he wanted. And they had parachutes and ladders and all the cool stuff, except for the one thing he didn't want. When his son blew out his arm, had Tommy John surgery at 15, 16 years old, never played baseball again. Now, that's an issue of just kind of blowing through the stoplight. That's an issue of seeing what the speed limit is and going faster, and thinking you're gonna get away with it. Because sometimes you will until you don't. And so that's really one of the things that the screen and the system does, is it kind of keeps guardrails and a speed limit on to know, okay, it's not that velocity training is bad. It's just that it may be bad for you right now. And unless I have a system, I have no way to tease that out.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously an extreme story, but I'm sure a lot of us can appreciate that, both as parents and training individuals. But I think one thing you did is you've got to have confidence in your ability, but also confidence in your program, in your system, to say, you know what, I'm not going to continue to butt heads with you. That's okay if you want to go somewhere else. I mean, that's sometimes that's the decision you got to make, because you're not going to be successful and they're not going to be successful.
Yeah, and I know is seeing it as the coach, as the trainer, but I also know seeing it as the dad, and sometimes we have to take a step back. And when a parent says to me, "Well, what's the proper protocol for icing my 11-year-old's arm?" And I'll say, "Well, icing is prescribed for trauma." Now we can argue whether that's the right thing or not, but my question first is, why are you inflicting trauma in your 11-year-old? Right? And that shouldn't be happening. This is sports. This is 11-year-old sports. Nobody's gotten drafted at 11 years old. So if you're inflicting that much trauma that is creating pain, and you need to get inflammation out and all those things, then we need to take that 10,000-foot view and say, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Again, trying to remove certain things, using some sort of system, like, obviously we're talking about movement, looking at your capacity and your performance. And I think we've been talking about removing certain things. I mean, that's obviously the big key to start. But also, once we start prescribing exercise, listen, at the end of the day, we're going to prescribe a workout. But part of what we got to do, and the reason I think, in my opinion, it's a system, is you've got to know that you're going down the right path. One thing, Eric, and speak to this a little bit, you've got to know that the exercise you're prescribing, whether it's to create their power, their rotation, anti-rotation, or it's a corrective, you've got to ensure that exercise is giving you the benefits you want. It's succeeding. And again, that's why one thing that people overlook is why you have to go back and recheck and retest to make sure that exercise is working.
Yeah, and because again, we're not training to get good at training. We're not deadlifting to get good at deadlifting, unless that's your sport, unless you're a power lifter. We're deadlifting to get more hip power, to get more connection from the lower and upper body. So unless it actually can translate and I can see that it is making improvements, then I'm just working out. And then you can just go on YouTube, or you could just go, quite frankly, you could go do yard work, you could go do anything and just work. We're here for a specific reason, and it's to get you better at what you came for.
Yeah, so again, I speak to so many people that say, I do the screen lead at the start, and then I realize I got to give them some correctives or mobility work or whatever it is, but they miss the most important piece. Did they go back and check to see, did they check their work? Did this, if you're trying to work on, hip mobility, well, you did a good job, you checked it, and you realize hip mobility is a problem. One, remove exercises that are loading that, but two, did the exercise work? Because just because I say it or you say it, Eric, doesn't mean it's going to work for this individual, because there's so many other factors that may be creating that problem. So we can't make an assumption that this corrective is going to work without checking it, because it may be something other than the exercises that's creating it.
Yeah, and so once we go through the correctives, you have to kind of pass three hurdles with me, and that's where the rescreening comes in. Is first is, can you get there? Can you even get there? So if you have an ankle mobility restriction, we're going to give you some corrections for ankle mobility, but we don't know if it worked. Let's go see if it improved. Now, if you go from poor ankle mobility to good ankle mobility by just doing a couple interventions and exercises, well, we know you can get there. Your body has given us positive feedback. It likes it. Hey, we know you can get there. Well, the next thing is, well, can you use it? Just because you have better ankle mobility in this isolated test doesn't mean you can actually use it when you're up on your feet and working out or going about your daily activities. So I need to know that, can you actually use it? That's where we start fortifying with motor control that we can build as a foundation to now set up strength and power. And then the last step is, you know, can you get there? Can you own it? But then can you actually use it on your feet? Can actually translate into your sport or activity? So you got to be able to know if it's even getting you there. If it is getting you there, can you own it? Meaning, can you walk in tomorrow and without a whole bunch of corrective exercise and foam rolling, that you can show me that same ankle mobility? And then once you can own it, can you use it? Can you actually use that up on your feet?
Yeah, and I think one of the frustrating things we have, especially in the world, kind of this area we're talking about now, is we identify a problem. Okay, yeah, Lee, I got it. I'm giving them exercises, but they keep coming back in with that same problem. And I think that's what you're getting at. We've got to own it. We've got to own that issue. But we also have to understand that something else may be driving that. And one quick story, that early in my career, again, working with these high school athletes, this one really, really good, he was getting recruited by a lot of Division I schools for football. He had mobility problems in his shoulders, which, again, he was doing a lot of upper body work. And I was like, all right, let's get your upper body moving. I would be able to get his shoulder mobility great. When I say great, I had him solid shoulder mobility. The way we screen it, we had 2s on it. Go from a 1 to a 2 every session, every time, 15 minutes, great. Shoulder mobility is good. You go to practice, knock it out. Every time he come back down, horrible. And I come to find out this kid was bench pressing 4 days a week. So I was doing my work, but I missed the biggest thing. Is what was creating his issue was him going in and doing benching, heavy benching 4 days a week right after I get his shoulders moving. So I think we can't underestimate how much we have to consider everything else, not just what they're doing when they see us.
Yeah, and it's not to say that bench pressing is bad, and that's going to have the same effect on every athlete. But the question is your training robbing from your movement? And so one of the reasons we need to go back and check our work is not so much check the client, it's to keep us in check, is to say, how good is your program? If I'm doing good programming, it should not only reinforce what we did, it should fortify what we did. And I should see my scores, if not stay the same, go up if I'm doing really good training.
Yeah, and the scores you're talking about is anything, whether it's power, whether it's strength. Again, really checking all of that to make sure you're on the right path. And let's be honest, we're all going to make mistakes, right? We're going to make mistakes training them, and they're going to make mistakes doing certain things they shouldn't do when they're outside and playing their sport. It's just a matter, and that's why I think it's a system that we're looking at, not just a simple program to say, okay, go do this. We've got to always check to see, are we continuing to progress? Some days are going to be better than others, right?
And are we progressing in what we need to progress in? When is enough enough? I can't tell you that if you get a 3 versus a 2 in that push-up, that it's going to make a significant difference in terms of your durability or your performance. And when we look at the other physical attributes, when is enough strength enough? Meaning that, okay, the difference between being able to bench press 350 versus 400, is that going to make a difference when you actually step out on the field? And it may not, because there's a difference between optimal and maximal. Just last week we had the world record in the deadlift at over 1,100 pounds. That guy is the strongest in the world in the deadlift, but he's not the fastest in the world. He's not necessarily the most agile in the world. He's very good at that one specific thing, and that's his sport. But there comes a point of diminishing returns with any physical development that, okay, I've got enough of this. It's time to look at what I don't have enough of, because that's what's going to ultimately hold me back.
Right. And one last thing before we take some questions that I definitely want you to speak to, because Eric, we first started talking, again, 15, 16 years ago, that intrigued me was the fact that you didn't just train people. You had a kind of a team approach, meaning you had some medical professionals around. You had some, I'm pretty sure you had a chiropractor that you work with a lot. So speak to just the importance that you feel of not just you as the strength coach, but also the fact that you've got other resources that you can point the person to if they need something.
Yeah, and one of the misinterpretations of movement screening, and when you start, screening movement, is people think, oh, you're a trainer trying to be a physical therapist. No, I'm a trainer who knows when I need one, and if anything, it keeps me inside my lane because I know if there's pain there, it we don't know what that pain's coming from. It be from tight tissue? Could it be from a joint restriction? Could be from a lot of different things. It could be from something medical. I've had kids who had shoulder pain because of a tight pec minor. I've had kids because of shoulder pain because they had a cancerous tumor. I can't tell that from a dowel rod and a 2x6. So I need to get you to a medical professional who could do a differential diagnosis and figure out, is this a health problem or is this a fitness problem? And I don't know that until I get somebody who can help in that process from the medical side.
No, that's perfect. I mean, that's so important for all of us that train individuals to understand is we need a team. And one thing that I try to tell people is, yeah, we're training all these individuals, but we're really managing their health, their performance. We're managing them. And we got to know when can I help and when do I need to go seek help for them. And I think if we look at more of managing a lot of these individuals, they will appreciate it much more. Let me as the professional, let me manage everything and kind of be the overseer if I've got to bring some other people in. So great, Eric. Let's take some questions and see what you guys have to say.
Let's go.
All right. Thanks, Lee. We had some great questions that came in, so we're going to ask about 6 or 7 of them. So, how do I help my athletes buy in and perform their corrective strategies?
Eric, I'll let you take a stab at that, then I'll chime in as well.
Okay, so it's in terms of selling movement and understanding that everything you do in the weight room or on the field is just derivative of one of these fundamental patterns, or it's a combination of these patterns. And if you can't do that, so the analogy I use, I actually stole from Paul Chek, is that if you look at a calculator, you have 0 through 9 make every single number in the world. So these fundamental patterns are kind of like those digits, where from there, everything you see on an athletic field is coming from one of these fundamental patterns. Now, let's say you have a broken 7 button. Now, you can work around that, but if you work around it a bunch, one of two things is going to happen. At the very least, it's going to slow down your performance. So even if you're awesome at math, it's going to slow down your ability to execute whatever it is you're trying to do using that calculator, because you have to work around this limitation. Or worse, you're going to start making mistakes. When we make mistakes in our body, the analogy is then we start to overload certain tissues because we can't access other tissues, and now we start to have breakdown.
Yeah, I like this question too, Eric, because I do think, and again, let's be honest, we've been part of the problem where, corrective exercise has become just this thing that everybody thinks they have to do. And at the end of the day, the conversations that I've had is, hey, this is your workout. This is what I'm having you do. I mean, we're going to progress from here. So I don't necessarily try to I kind of gotten away from it, to be honest, and experience over the years is saying, hey, these are corrective exercises. Nope, hey, this is your workout, period. And we're going to get you to where you need to go. It's going to require you to do some of these things. And the one thing that I think you'll see is that if you pick the right corrective exercise, so to speak, and again, get away from more corrective, it's going to be hard. It's going to be extremely difficult for them to do, which that to me will allow them to buy in. You get somebody to roll around the floor or even crawling, and after a couple of reps, they're sweating and they're winded, then you know you're on the right track. And to me, that's where you get the buy-in.
All right, great. Is there a difference in your approach to programming for young developing athletes versus, say, a developed pro athlete?
Eric, this is right in your wheelhouse. So I'll let you hit this one out of the park.
Okay, well, you're making the assumption that the pro athlete is developed. And, I had this conversation actually with a father last night who has a young baseball player. And he was concerned about the myths about strength training and stunting their growth, and when is it safe to start training. And I said, look, there are 9 and 10-year-olds that I'm comfortable putting a dumbbell in there or kettlebell in their hand, and there's 18-year-olds I wouldn't let go near a weight. And that's really because their movement competency and what they've shown me, and do they need additional challenge? So that's really all it is to say, okay, here's where you want to be, here's where you are now. What is the missing factors? So really, the approach is the same. The end result is what's different. I don't need to have that developing 14-year-old. I don't need to have them at the same level that the pro athlete has, because they don't have the same demands. They're not traveling. They're not playing day games after night games. They're not going up against an NFL, 250-pound linebacker that runs a 4.5. So the demands are different, but the system is still the same. It's still screen them, find their weakest links, address those weak links, and then fill in the blanks with good training.
All right, so our next question is also for Eric. Is the goal to make an asymmetrical pattern in a thrower symmetrical? And is it even possible with all the repetition?
Okay, is it possible? Yes. Is it necessary? No, we don't necessarily need them to be completely symmetrical. And when we say symmetrical really within reason. Most of the research shows that there's a certain amount of variability you're going to have right to left, and that's natural. That's okay. There was a research looking at hip extension, showed anything less than 15% really didn't make an impact. But that's where the tipping point was. If you got beyond that point, it's no different than we have when we look at a 2-3 asymmetry versus a 1-3 asymmetry. If you're a 1, that's a huge problem, regardless whether it's asymmetrical or not. If you're a 2-3, then I'm not as concerned with it. My job is to make sure you don't become that 1-3, and really make sure that it doesn't become a significant issue. And then also, it's somewhat relative to where they are in scheme of their competition. So when you start changing movement, it's going to change everything that their skill was built on top of. So if you take an athlete in the off season and you want to work on developing a little more symmetry, that's a big difference between, I'm not going to go and mess with their symmetry the day before a game, because that's going to have a huge influence on their entire neuromuscular system. And I don't know if I want that to affect their skill in a negative way. So it's somewhat relative also to where they are in their level of competition, or stage of competition, I should say.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing, Eric. I think you touched on it. It's the extreme asymmetries, and I think that's been another big misconception. And again, we've been part of that problem, saying we want to stay away from asymmetries, or asymmetries are bad. It's those extreme asymmetries that we're always talking about. And one thing with an overhand athlete, you may have, you're comfortable with an overhand athlete having a little bit of an asymmetry in right and left, but how much does that asymmetry impact other movements? And maybe the other movements that we don't want to have so much asymmetry in. So it's those extreme asymmetries and how those asymmetries impact other things.
It's also who they are and where the asymmetry is. If I have an NFL defensive back and they have a 2-3 asymmetry in one of their lower body patterns, their hurdle step or their lunge, that's going to be a big difference than Grandma Betty having a 2-3 asymmetry, because of the horsepower that they're putting through their whole body. And so, that could end up being a tweaked hamstring or something like that. Whereas, I always joke, I don't move fast enough for a 2-3 asymmetry to make a difference in me. I pulled my hamstring in a pickup football game 2 years ago. I was so excited I actually produced that much force. I don't think it's relative to who you're working with and what pattern it is. If it's a 2-3 asymmetry in a thrower in their shoulder mobility, that's kind of to be expected.
All right, and our next question, I believe, can be for both Lee and Eric. How often do you rescreen your athletes, and what about teams?
I'll start this one, Eric, and you chime in as well. I hate to answer it this way, but I am, and it really does depend. And when I say it depends on how bad they did. If they do really poor, Eric mentioned that he had someone that scored a 9. Well, I'm going to want to rescreen that person more often, and maybe only rescreen that one pattern that I'm working on to see how much. So when I say that, may be every time they walk in the door, okay, let's look at your leg raise, let's look at your squat, let's look at whatever, maybe that one pattern. If that one pattern has gotten better, then I may take the opportunity to go through all the other tests. So really, it kind of depends. If they score well, maybe once a month, once every 6 weeks, just to make sure that, he or she and I both are on the right path. So really, whether they score poorly or better, and then teams, again, it depends on the environment. It depends on the sport. Usually preseason, middle of the season, and postseason, kind of going into their off-season conditioning. So when I was working with teams, it would be typically 3 times a year is when I would screen them. But Eric may have something different.
Yeah, no, actually, it's a lot of things are the same that I would say. The only thing I would say from a numbers management. So I was with the Giants. We would have as many as 90 guys on the roster, and I was there twice a week. I can't screen 90 players every time I'm there, nor do I need to. So we would do our initial screenings, and then what I would do is I'd place you into groups. And if you were somebody that had all 2s or higher with no asymmetries, no pain, then sometimes I didn't even know your name after the first screen. But if you were somebody that scored poorly, had 0s, 1s, asymmetries, well, there was a note in your program that you needed to see me every time you were there. And my goal was to get it so you didn't need to see me anymore. So like Lee said, I'd recheck whatever your worst pattern is, give you some correctives for that. Next time in, let's recheck it. And once you've gotten to where that's improved, let's recheck everything. And my goal is to get you kind of off of my list to where you're going to go on the list with the other guys that move well, and we'll check you just periodically from here on.
All right. What do you do if someone's FMS screen gets worse after programming after their first screen?
Yeah, Eric, you got a great, I love how you responded to this question, so I'll let you take this.
Okay, so the first question is okay, did you actually follow the program? And when I say follow the program, not just did you do the exercises, but did you do what I asked you to do in terms of things that you needed to not do? So for your athlete that was the shoulder mobility issue, if you told him not to bench and he continues to bench, well, there's your answer. It's not a matter of that you did anything wrong other than reinforce the importance that we need to hold off on benching for now. So did you actually avoid the things you were supposed to avoid? The second thing is, did you do the program? And if you did it, did you do it right? And so I'm going to say, all right, do me a favor, just show me your corrective exercises. And a lot of times you'll see something back that's completely different from what you showed them. And now it's just a matter of tweaking your technique and your form of the exercise, and it clears right up. And then from there, it's just a matter of compliance. That's why a lot of times what I'll do is, let's say we are working on shoulder mobility. We're going to say, here's your 3 or 4 drills I'm going to send you home with. Let's do them. Let's recheck your shoulder mobility right here on the spot before you go home. And when they pick up 3, 4, 5 inches of range of motion right there in the spot, say, okay, we know this works. Now it's on you to do it. So it's not like they stop working when you get home and I have some, magic wand that makes them work. It's a matter of now just being able to do them correctly and do them consistently. And you know what? The thing is the more often you do it, the better you're going to get at it, the faster this thing clears up. So that's going to also be the carrot, because that kid, that he wants the bench press. You don't do it 4 times a week unless you really love it. So he wants to get back to his bench press. So, okay, here's your carrot. As soon as you can walk in cold and show me 2s, I'm going to let you start bench pressing again. Now, we're going to keep an eye on it to make sure you don't overdo it. But that's going to be our incentive to get you back to bench pressing or running or whatever it is we took away from you.
Well, I think one thing you said there is important is you've got to see that improvement. You've got to make sure that, in that one session, you need to make sure that you see and get the feedback that the person did get better when you prescribe this exercise for whatever you're trying to get out of it. And to be honest, I get this question a lot too. And the screen did its job, in my opinion. Your system did its job. It said, hey, this didn't work. We didn't see any improvement. Well, don't throw the test out. Just tweak what you did, whether that's advice and, hey, you need to stop eating at McDonald's 4 days a week if you're trying to lose weight, or, hey, stop bench pressing 5 days a week. Those are the things we have to consider just as much or maybe more, some of their behaviors, as it is the exercise.
This is our last question of the day. Rotary stability seems very important for a throwing athlete. If they score 2s on a screen, would you keep applying correctives until they scored 3s?
So I'll take a stab at this one. Again, the standard FMS line is, once they're 2s, they've passed. You have passed, you've met the minimum standard. Again, we can look at minimums with FMS. Our goal is to make sure, you've met the threshold, and that threshold is you passed. Once you've passed, now go train. Now, once I'm training you, the goal is not to revert back. So twos on the thing like rotary stability is fine. Now we need to look maybe at higher level, look at some capacity testing. We may find there are some performance related measures that you have bigger problems with and we want to train you, some sport specific things. So that's the direction we will go rather than trying to get you to a 3. We know by throwing you're going to create some asymmetries. So the goal would be, let's keep your 2s and let's move on and try to find something else we have to focus on. So Eric, you may have some other stuff to add.
Yeah, it's funny because the only people who really get caught up in the 3s, especially on rotary stability, is us, right? We teach a class and everybody's is fuming because they can't get a 3 on rotary stability. And they want to know the secret to how do you get a 3 in this. Is the reality is we don't really care. Once you get to 2s, you move well enough. That's not your biggest barrier right now. The only thing I would say with the throwers is to say, not only is rotary stability affecting your throwing, but is your throwing affecting your rotary stability? If you go throw a bullpen, or after you start increasing your throwing volume and your rotary stability gets worse, well, that's something that we need to look at in terms of your activity is affecting your movement as opposed to the movement affecting the activity.
Well, that's great, Eric. I appreciate you so much coming on and giving us some insight on different training and things you're doing, especially with all the work and those different athletes you deal with. So thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you and Gray
for watching today. As promised, here is our special offer. Use promo code COACHERIC for 35% off this online training essentials bundle. This can be purchased at functionalmovement.com. Again, that's Coach Eric for 35% off this online training essentials bundle. Also, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and our other social media channels for the latest news, updates, and stories from FMS. Please drop us a comment and let us know what topics you'd like to see from us in the future. We are busy planning more FMS Live content for you, so stay tuned and we look forward to having you back. Until then, remember, to move well, move often.